What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing a video that I have been sort of thinking about doing for a very long time. It's been on my mind for ages, but never really got around to doing it, and now due to lack of other content, I am going to do. Alright, so today we're doing a very short, brief, detailed, intertwined history of this vehicle due to the fact that a lot of you who are new to this channel or who have subscribed since I started rebuilding this car probably don't fully understand how important this car has been to both the channel and my personal life as well, I suppose. It's to get where it is now has involved a lot of people and a lot of time and a lot of different things. So it's pretty wild, the actual history of from when I bought this car to now, the first time. Have to add that, the first time I bought this car to now. Unfortunately, I don't know much about the history of this car previous to me buying it. I would love to find out one day, and that will probably be for another video. But for today's video is going to be pretty much the history of this car from when it came into my hands to now, which has been pretty wild, so hope you enjoy. So for where this car has come to at the moment, forgive how dirty it is, I actually still haven't washed it since Matsuri, even though I've been ginning around with the hot side and doing all sorts of things. I actually have not cleaned this car since Matsuri, but apologise for how dirty it is, but I thought I'd get it in the shot for this video because it's going to be exciting. So for where this car is at the moment, I have to go way back to Power Cruise 2015. So 2015 Power Cruise was the year that Rex absolutely minced the 400 on the burnout pad. It was a very sad time for Onsong Performance and for me and Rex collectively. A lot of money went to waste at Power Cruise that year. But regardless, there was a RB30 Turbo Patrol for sale in Jim Boomer. At the time I was living in Toowoomba. I'd recently sold my TD42 Turbo GQ Patrol. I'd been without a four-wheel drive for a little while. At this point I owned my pretty off-tap GC8 Subaru WRX, full straight cut gears, like full forged stroke build. It was a pretty wild Subaru that I owned, but I did very much miss having a four-wheel drive. So I decided I want a four-wheel drive that was pretty cool, you know, could dose, do turbo things. This RB30 Turbo GQ Patrol popped up for sale in Jim Boomer. Looked really good, it was a good price, everything about it looked pretty good. So I decided that I was living in Toowoomba. I'd recently moved there from the Sunshine Coast, so I got Brendan, who you all know from popping up in the videos now and then. Brendan, I got him to drive from the sunny coast to pick me up in Toowoomba to take me back to Ipswich to go to Power Cruise, so that after Power Cruise that weekend he could take me to Jim Boomer and drop me off to pick up this Patrol that I could then take home to Toowoomba. So we formulated this big plan, everything was sweet. I got the cash out, ready to go. Went to Power Cruise, had a equally terribly and awesome weekend. Had a lot of fun, but yeah, obviously Rex did bad things to the 400, which was very bad. But anyway, after that, we got Brendan to take me to look at this GQ Patrol. It wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. The idler pulley was all sorts of wobbly doing these ones. The tent gauge didn't work, which was a problem for me because it was a VLT ECU, so it was untuned for the turbo, and I had to drive it up the Toowoomba range. So to do that, those two things combined with no temperature gauge that worked, I was pretty skeptical about driving it home. And the other thing was the thing just reeked like cigarettes inside, and I wasn't keen on it. So I said to Brendan, I was like, look man, I'm not too keen on this Patrol, would you mind like taking me home? And lucky enough, Brendan was cool enough to just drop me back at Toowoomba and then go back to the coast, which is lucky for me. So I didn't end up buying this Patrol. 2 weeks down the track, I ended up buying a aspirated 1HZ diesel 80 series Land Cruiser, which is a pretty good vehicle. But regardless, probably 2 weeks later, these people that were selling this Patrol messaged me and they were like, oh, look, we fixed these issues that you didn't like about the Patrol and we've dropped the price to this. Are you still interested? Do you want to buy it? And I said to them, I was like, look, I'm not that interested in it. I've already bought another vehicle by this point. But I did have a mate that was looking for something very similar. So I said to him, look, I'll pass on your details to a mate of mine who's looking for something similar, and I'll get him to get in touch with you because he'll probably be interested. So another one of mine and Rex's very good mates, Alexander, Sandy. Sandy was looking for something similar to this GQ Patrol, so I passed the details on to Sandy. Sandy ended up buying this turbo GQ, which was, it actually turned out to be quite a cool vehicle. I drove it a few times when Sandy owned it, and the thing used to load up and dose like nothing else. It was absolutely awesome. So a very cool car. Sandy's actually still got it. He ended up ute chopping it, and he's since moved. It's up in Mount Isa now, I think. So Sandy still owns that car. But you're probably thinking at this point, what the hell does this have to do with the goddamn 31 behind me? Well, the whole deal was this car, this GQ that I nearly bought and then Sandy ended up buying, before the motor that it had in it that it was sold with, it had another VLT motor in it that was quote unquote cooked according to the owners that were selling the car. So they were under the impression that this motor was absolutely cooked. They were going to sell it to either one of us, whoever bought it. It was getting sold as a spare engine. They were pretty much said, this is a cooked motor, take it with the car. Now the thing is, when Sandy went and picked it up, he didn't have the means to take the extra motor with him, so he didn't bring it back with him. So a few months down the track, time went on, Sandy actually asked Rex to build a new exhaust and fit a new clutch for this GQ for him. And he said to him, in return for him doing the work, he would give Rex the spare motor that was meant to come with his GQ. So Rex thought that's a pretty good deal, so Rex went and did that. So Rex built Sandy a new exhaust and fitted a new clutch for him, which ended up being a runabout. Yeah, we won't get into that, but it ended up being a pain in the ass. But anyway, so that happened. So then Rex was essentially owed this extra motor, which is all well and good except for the fact that Sandy still didn't have it in his possession. It still was with the people that sold Sandy the car. So anyway, a few months go on, me and Rex are at work. Obviously at this point we were still working together. Rex was daily driving the yellow one-tonner, which you may have seen or may not have seen in a few videos depending how new you are to the channel. But the yellow HX one-tonner, Rex was daily driving that at the time. We're at work and Rex got the text from Sandy saying, look man, these guys who sold me the Patrol are going to throw this engine in the skip bin, like at the moment, because they're moving house. And he basically said if he wants this motor, he's got to go and get it now because otherwise it's going to the tip. So Rex takes all afternoon off work, gets this message, jets off work, shoots down to Jim Boomer to pick up this extra motor, literally fishes it out. Him and Sandy literally fished it out of a skip bin. He brought it back here on the yellow tonner. Rex gets it back here, this cooked motor that they said was cooked. Mind you, these people weren't too cluey with engines. They weren't actually able to tell anybody what was wrong with this motor. All they had to say was that it was cooked. So when it got back here, Rex pulled the head off it. We inspected everything from we could see from taking the head off, all looked sweet. And for any of you that actually watched the build series on rebirthing this car, you will understand that even when we tore that motor down, it all looked very good right until the main bearing. So that's the story of how the bin motor, or the bin RB30 that's in this car, came to be in my possession, or in our possession, which was in turn my possession because it's in my car. So that's where this story started. So that's way back in 2015 where this starts. So anyway, that's the story of the motor, where it came from. Obviously, if you've seen the series, you've seen what ended up happening, but I'll get to that a bit later. Alright, so fast forward a couple of months, towards the end of 2015, me and the girl that I was dating at the time decided to go our separate ways. So I moved back from Toowoomba actually moved back to Brisbane at the time, and that was in December of 2015, that happened. So prior to that, I had sold my pretty ridiculous Subaru. Pretty much let go of everything that was fun that I liked doing because we bought a house and we did all that, you know, adulty stuff. And after we split up in December, I had like a couple of weeks there, and then sort of it was Valentine's Day was the day I actually bought this car the first time. So I had always wanted to drift. It is something that I always wanted to do. And interestingly enough, when I came across this car, I was actually looking for a R32 4-door. I've always had a massive soft spot for them. Always loved R32 4-doors. So that's what I was looking for when I found this car. But in my searches, obviously the R31 has popped up, and it was just too good to pass up. It was already turbo, it had the RB30 box in it, had good coilovers in it, half decent looking rotor wheels. Already had the Microtech LT8, It had a KKR 660 on a high mount, so quite a big turbo for what it is on a high mount setup. So it was a good deal. I paid back then $4,000 I think on the nose, or maybe 4,200 or something for the car, and it was, you know, it was a really good deal, especially considering the prices of 31s these days. It was a very good deal at the time. So that was pretty much my very first Valentine's Day as an adult on my own. This was my Valentine's Day gift to myself. So that was Valentine's Day 2016. I actually purchased this car the first time. And the whole idea was to sort of have something that I could, you know, have a bit of fun in, do a bit of drifting, because I had the Subaru, which is all-wheel drive, and that was really my introduction into Japanese turbo cars. And previously I had a lot of old school Holdens and old school Cruisers and built a lot of cool, and me and Rex, like Rex is right into Chevs and stuff, like had V8s and that. But after my little dip into Japanese cars, and I'd always wanted to try drifting, I really wanted a cool turbo Jap rear-wheel drive car to start doing a bit of drifting. And so this was sort of my foot in the door for that, and it was great. It was awesome. So I bought that in February on Valentine's Day. Took me a little while to actually get all the little issues with it sorted, get it on the road, and then get it tuned. And I pretty much enjoyed it like that for quite a while. So that was just with the RB30 box in it and the KKR on it, and it was tuned to 320 wheel-ish, and it was just a street car. At the time, it was, because it was a 31 and because of what it was always just a pig to me. I was like, I'm never spending any money on this car. I kept dodgy fixing everything that ever went wrong with it. I was street driving it quite a bit. Soon after I bought the car, I actually moved from the Brisbane back up to the Sunshine Coast, and that's actually when I sort of fell back into that group with Liam and Adam and all that. Obviously we had all been friends since high school. We all went to high school together, but Adam and Liam, like we sort of lost contact after school, and I moved to Toowoomba, I moved away and stuff. And when I moved back with this car, I started to realize that all those boys had actually got quite into cars and all had cars of their own. So we started doing a lot of cruising and stuff. And yeah, there's more of us obviously than just us and Adam and Liam, but obviously for you guys that watch the channel, those are the main people that you know. It was awesome. Like, we're just going on cruises a lot of weekends, just absolutely abusing the heck out of this car, and I had an awesome time. So pretty much that just continued like that. Adam had at that point he had the Merc, and then he ended up getting an R33 on E85 with a 3025 in it, like a hybrid twin cam RB30, which was pretty off tap on E85. So when he started driving that around, we both sort of was pushing each other on the street and being pretty silly. And we both got pretty silly to the point where I was like, oh, something's got to give soon. We've got to get in trouble or something soon. And then unfortunately, one of our very good friends, he passed away. And at his wake, he was always a big fan of this car. And at his wake, I sort of just remember I was fucking off tap in this car on the street, driving like an idiot. So after that, I was sort of like, all right, I really need to look at, you know, taking this thing to the track to get this out of me, because it was that day in particular, I remember on the street was just ridiculous, especially the time of day that I was playing up and where I was playing up was just ridiculous. So soon after that, before Christmas in 2016, we went on like a mountain run, and I popped the gearbox in it. And I popped the gearbox, and I was like, at that point, I don't know, I was sort of just over everything. So I just sort of parked it in the shed here. Didn't touch it for a long time. A couple of months go by, so that was December. So a couple of months go by, so it would have been spring. It would have been autumn Matsuri 2017. Me and the boys went down just to spectate, and I loved it. It's the first time I'd ever actually been to a Matsuri, even just to watch. And it was just absolutely the best thing I'd ever seen. So I just decided at that point, I was like, I'm going to have, because I was toying up with the idea of selling the Skylon at that point, because I don't know, I just wasn't that interested at that point. I was sort of just floating around, you know, whatever. So at that point, I just didn't really know what I was going to do with it. And then after Matsuri, I just thought, nah, I'm going to have this thing ready for the next Matsuri. And I did. So I went home, sorted it out, put another RB30 gearbox in it, or RB20 gearbox in it, either way, put another small box in it. I changed the hot side setup, changed the cold side setup as well, put a new intake manifold, everything. on it, and got it all retuned with the new setup with a 3076, and had it ready for spring Matsuri that year. So in 6 months I had it ready, which was, you know, not much work for what I did. But either way, that was my first real track day. And I remember at the time, everyone that I sort of was driving with, all of those boys sort of thought I was insane for just going straight to a Matsuri to send it. And it's funny, actually, along the lines of that 6 months of between me going to that Matsuri and then getting my car ready for the next one, I somehow convinced Rex to buy into the 31 idea as well. And that's how Rex ended up with the white 31, because after he binned his 400 small block at Power Cruise, he built the big block that's in the tonner now, the blue one. Again, sorry guys, for those of you who are new here, probably don't quite understand what I'm talking about that much, but the blue tonner Raucous, at that Power Cruise where I was going to buy that GQ, he binned the small block. For the next Power Cruise, he had built a big block, a nitrous supercharged big block for it, which he drove it at Power Cruise. He wasn't that happy with it. He missed his really snappy, aspirated, high revving small block. So he had like a bunch of money sitting there ready to rebuild his small block with the new block. He was going to order all the new stuff, and I sort of got in his ear and I was like, look, you know just as well as I know that as soon as I start actually track drifting this car, you're going to want in. You're going to want to get one, and you're going to want one in your own. And I was like, instead of putting all this money into another small block build for your one tonner, which you have been, you know, fighting with for 10 plus years, I was like, buy an R31 and we'll go drifting together. And somehow I managed to convince him to actually do that. So that spring Matsuri 2017, I had this thing ready. Rex also had a 31 there. So we were both going drifting. It was really cool. Anyway, Rex binned a motor on the first day, and then I blew a gearbox up at the very start of the second day, I think. I blew up another gearbox. So that was the second small blocks that I'd blown up in this car, 2 different setups. Luckily, just before that Matsuri, I had actually bought a 25 bucks for it. I just hadn't had time to change it before Matsuri. So I wasn't that mad about it. I binned a box, I went home. That weekend, I literally 25 bucks swapped the car, and it was sat idle, ready to go for the next one. So after that, I did a few short track days. I did one short track day, I did one Friday night drift, and then I did the next Matsuri, which was Autumn Matsuri 2018. Which again, that was when I really started to pick up the channel. So from here on, you would have seen, those who were here from the start would know, but a lot of you who are new here probably don't bother to go back to watch those old videos, which I can definitely understand because there's a lot of them and it's too hard to catch up. So did Matsuri early 2018, Autumn Matsuri, had a ball of time. Car was awesome all weekend. All I did was blow out a T3 gasket on the end of the, not the end, but basically halfway through Sunday morning I blew out a T3 gasket. Again, I didn't really mind. Like, I pack up, I get home at a decent hour. No harm, no foul. Quite a good weekend. Had an awesome time. But by then I was sort of, my driving was developing pretty well. I was itching to build a more serious car for drifting. And the 31, it just, it needed, with my knowledge back then, admittedly, I didn't have as much knowledge as I do now about drifting and setups. And in my head at that time, I thought I really needed to go way more aggressive in the front end to have more lock. And I didn't want to, because I always had visions of putting this car back onto the street. So I didn't want to go cutting up the front end to make wheels fit. I didn't want to go doing all that sort of thing, because I always had this vision of putting this car back on the street. And back then I didn't have the knowledge that I know now of how to set up the front end of the car the way it is. So I had in my head that I wanted to build a more serious drift car and put this car back on the street. So this was at the end of autumn 2018. So we're talking about March, April 2018. And so where we run into this story, I have to go back again. We've got to backtrack again. Sorry guys. So sorry guys, when I started filming this, I thought it would actually be quite a short and sweet video, but we're getting pretty deep into stuff here. So hope you're enjoying, and hope you're having fun. So we got to shoot back to 2014 now. July 2014 we got to go back to. So previous to July 2014, I was a motorcycle nut. Still really am today, but in July 2014 I had an accident where I seriously wrecked my arm. really messed it up. Did a lot of real bad damage. Wasn't looking very good for me for a long time. So a couple of surgeries later, a lot of rehabilitation and reconstruction in my elbow. I was sort of to the point where they were pretty happy. Everything was meant to be all right. So I sort of went back to doing my thing. Never went back to riding because I couldn't afford with the arm to keep hurting my arm and that. So never really got back to riding. But then obviously all the story just told previous. Fast forward to April 2018. I start having some troubles with my arm again. At this point, I'm a communications rigger, so at this point for work, I was climbing, building towers for Telstra, that sort of thing, putting up base stations for mobile phone networks. That was my bread and butter. That's what I did for a long time. So that's what I'm doing at the moment whilst trying to sort of drift. At this point, YouTube, I just sort of started the YouTube thing. That's when I really started putting out videos on this channel. I'm having some issues with my arm. I go to the specialist, get x-rays, all this sort of stuff. I find out that actually where I completely shattered my radial head has actually been broken the whole time since they thought it was sort of healed way back in 2015, I think I had my last surgery. So I broke it in 2014, but I think by the last surgery it was early 2015. And I find out it's actually been broken for a long time while I've been climbing and hauling on ropes and doing all this sort of stuff. That's why I've been having so much trouble with my arm. At this sort of point, I sort of decided that I was going to quit my job rigging just because it wasn't sustainable. If my arm was really this bad and it was broken, you know, continuously climbing every day and hauling on ropes, getting stuff up towers all the time, it was not going to be very good as in the long term for my arm. So I decided to give up my job at that point. And because my arm was broken and I was in a little bit of limbo, waiting for specialist results, x-rays, all this sort of stuff, I was in between like a rock and a hard place because of work. Didn't really have any work. I just purchased the two S13s, which you see out here on some videos. Now, I purchased both these S13s with a plan. Unfortunately, that plan didn't eventuate very fast in between all this. Alright, so, sorry guys. The whole idea with the S13s was to build a more serious drift car out of one of them. The other one was going to be a street car, which I would sell to use that money to put this car back on the street. And then I would have a serious S13 drift car and my R31 would be back on the street. So that's how it was meant to play out. Obviously, within all this, my issues with work happened, found my arms broken, quit my job. My plan with the S13s didn't quite work out fast enough, and there wasn't really enough there for me to fire sale off enough to pay the bills I had to pay at the time. So I was sort of forced and strong-held into a financial point of having to sell this car. So that is how the car got sold in the first place. So I think it was about halfway through 2018, probably less. I sold this car and I had it up for sale as it was, drift ready with all the gear in it for a while. No one really interested. Again, it was probably a high price at the time, but the same thing where you look at the prices of these cars now and it actually was very cheap. So I had the car up for sale for quite a while, didn't really have a lot of interest. I got a call one day from a bloke who was you know, really straightforward, straight to the point, told me exactly what he wanted the car for, what he wanted to do with it. And his whole deal was that he had his EH that was his old man's, and he had built a 202 for it, which he wasn't quite happy with. He wanted to just take the entire running gear out of my 31 and plug it into his EH. So he sort of pitched the idea to me to start with. I wasn't too keen to begin with because I really wanted to sell it for a decent price as it was. After a little while, I started to realize that no one was really going to be coming up with the money to buy it how it was. And Luke, who ended up buying it, this bloke, who you actually haven't seen on the channel yet, but you will see a bit of soon, I promise that. I ended up coming up to a deal with him because I got to keep the suspension, the front end setup, essentially everything in this car that wasn't to do with just the motor, gearbox, diff, I ended up getting to keep, which I did quite well out of. So Luke purchased the car. I ended up just putting regular stock R31 front end back in it, stock R31 suspension, put all just regular R31 stuff back in it to sell it to him for a half decent price so that he could pull the running gear out and put it in his EH. And then I sold off what I took out of it, and actually I did pretty well out of the sale. I ended up getting very close to what I was asking for the whole car, and obviously made a whole lot of cool friends on the way. So that's the best thing about cars, really, is how many cool friends you meet. So Luke buys the car. Me and Luke keep in contact because I was actually very interested in what he was doing with his EH because I thought it was really cool. So me and Luke kept in contact for quite a while. So, you know, what happened in that time? After I sold this, that was when both the Silvias sort of turned to crap. So my plan with the Silvias didn't work out. As you guys know, I started on the Crusader, and that got to a point where I hit a wall with aftermarket support for the chassis, and I realized that finishing the car was going to cost quite a bit because there was not much aftermarket support for the chassis in Australia. So what I ended up coming to, I think I made a video, I tacked it onto an end of a video. I can't actually remember what it was, but I think I pretty much told you guys that I was looking to pretty much buy something like a 2-wheel drive Hilux, a 3RZ Hilux or something like that, that I could actually use to start doing a bit more driving while I finish the Crusader build. So I made that video and I stewed on it for a little while. I knew that this shell was sitting at Luke's doing nothing because I'd actually hit up Luke to buy a few things off the shelf here and there. So I knew it was sitting there, and I did some sums about what I still had left over from all my RB gear from having R31s, you know, and parting out the S13s. I still had clutches, I still had I had so much stuff left over from all these cars that I sort of did some math, and I figured out that if I could buy this shell back for a decent price, I could actually rebuild this car for not much more than it would cost me to buy something like a Hilux or what I was talking about. And I was pretty right, I hit the nail on the head. I ended up buying the shell back. Luke did me a really good deal on it because obviously from me and Luke keeping in touch and him, you know, watching the channel and that sort of stuff, he started to realise the road that this car had been down with me. So he was really cool with me buying the shell back. He did me a really good price, really good deal on it. I bought it back. Obviously Luke had used the entire fuel system, including the fuel tank, the diff, the motor and box, the tail shaft. He had used like literally everything out of this car. As you guys who have followed the build would have seen, I bought this car back as pretty much a bare, almost non-rolling shell. It was rolling literally because of a diff that Luke tire wired into it that I had to give him back. So it was essentially a non-rolling shell that I bought back. And from that point, I managed to rebuild it into what it is now, using the parts I had left over, plus buying a whole heap of parts, and using that bin motor that actually came out of a bin that we salvaged from a previous expedition of something I was going to buy that a mate ended up buying. So that there is pretty much where this video ends. So there you go, guys. That's pretty much where that history of the car comes to an end. Apart from you that have watched the entire build, you would know what happens from there. For a long time, I've wanted to do one of these, my build in 10 minutes, you know, jumping on that YouTube fad train. A bit late to the party with that one, but I do plan on doing one for this car, for this build. But I wanted to put out this video first so that you sort of understood a little bit of the history of the car and why it was such a big deal for me to get back the bare shell and rebuild it, rather than just doing another car for the money. So admittedly, this car has cost a little bit more than I anticipated originally, but I'm still so glad that I actually rebuilt this car instead of doing a different one. So very happy with it. The setup is awesome. It's just as good as I imagined. Driving it is absolutely awesome. So loving this vehicle. I will do a video, a build in 10 minutes for those of you who are that new to the channel that you missed a lot of the build series, so that you can try and catch up on actually what has gone into this car since. Yeah, really just wanted to get this video out there of the history of this car and how it came to be and where it is now. So as I'll explain in that next video that I do, since I bought the car back, I ended up buying a lot of the parts back from Luke that he wanted to keep. Just again, Luke's a car person, and as we all know, it's the classic story of I'm just gonna do this, which turns into the next thing, which turns into the next thing, which turns into the next thing, and I ended up with a whole heap of stuff back for it. So I will cover all that in the next video I do about the actual rebirth of this car. But I hope you enjoy that little bit of history and how this car came to be, where it is now. So obviously after Luke had this shell in his yard, Rex bent his 31, so I bought the Rio and the infill panel off this car to fix, we fixed Rex's car, and the headlights actually, and we fixed Rex's car with those parts. Quite a few parts of this car ended up on Liam's R31 build, before I sold it to Luke. So the car sort of got a little bit parted out. Everyone got a piece of it. Luke got what he wanted out of it. I ended up with the shell back, and now it's been rebuilt. And along the lines, I ended up buying, you know, my old ECU, my old injectors, everything sort of came back together, and now we're here. So it's a really funny story the way that happens. Just sort of weirdly cool that the car went into building so many other cool things, and now it is where it is. And so also, as well as just rebuilding bin and motor, I actually ended up using parts from that first motor that Rex blew up at the first Matsuri we went to together. I used that rotating assembly to rebuild the bin motor that we ended up with. So it is like a real weird, all-inclusive story of all this stuff that came together to get the car where it is now. So hope you guys have enjoyed the little story. Alrighty, sorry guys, camera went flat, so I had to wait for it to charge up. But anyway, hope you enjoyed watching this video. Keep tuned for the next video, which is hopefully going to be like a recap of this entire build. Like build in 10 minutes. Hope I can fit it in 10 minutes. So we'll sort of pick up where this one leaves off, and I'll go through this rendition of the 31 from start to finish, hopefully very shortly.